This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Donald Trump becomes the first former US president to be convicted on criminal charges. We'll tell you what it means for November's election. Bloomberg learns that US officials are slowing down exports of Nvidia's chips to the Middle East over national security concerns. Plus, a new dawn in South Africa, the ANC prepares for its first coalition as vote counting continues. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Donald Trump has become the first former US president to be convicted in a criminal trial. A New York jury found him guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records to conceal a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Prosecutors said it was a conspiracy that deprived voters of vital information before the 2016 election. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg spoke after the verdict.
I did my job. Our job is to follow the facts and the law without fear or favor, and that's exactly what we did here. And what I feel is just gratitude to work alongside phenomenal public servants who do that each and every day. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
Alvin Bragg, Manhattan District Attorney, speaking there after the 5-week trial that came in with a verdict 5 months before the US presidential election. Trump, who still faces 3 other criminal trials, is due to be sentenced on July 11th. Trump's conviction raises a number of questions for this year's presidential race. The former president would not be able to pardon himself if he were re-elected president, as this is a state charge. Speaking after the verdict, Trump said November's election result will be the real test.
This was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Donald Trump speaking there. Few experts are convinced that the trial's result will have a significant bearing on outcomes at the polls, given Trump has already survived 2 impeachments and other scandals. Joe Biden's communications director says the result shows no one is above the law. President Biden will allow Ukraine to use American weapons against military targets inside a limited area of Russia. The US president has given permission for strikes near the northeast border area of Kharkiv. The advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries, Yuri Sak, made the case for their use to Bloomberg before the decision became public.
We're entitled to use whatever means we have to protect our people. If you look at the map, if you consider, how close these Russian troops are from Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine, only 35 kilometers from the border. So we see all these amassed Russian troops, these terrorists, preparing their missiles, launching their glide bombs.
The advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries, Yuri Sak, speaking there. Although longer-range strikes with American munitions remain prohibited, the decision marks a significant shift for Biden. His administration has feared a potential escalation of the war. The United States is clamping down on how much artificial intelligence technology it sends to the Middle East. Bloomberg has learned that chip makers such as Nvidia and AMD are having export licenses for AI accelerators delayed. Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons says American officials are conducting a national security review.
Sending large-scale shipments to the Middle East could be a way for China to get around the restrictions that the U.S. has put into place and access these chips and data centers to develop their own technology. And that technology getting into the hands of, say, the Chinese military is what the U.S. is really looking to avoid.
Lyons adds, we don't know yet how long the review may take, but the slowdown has so far lasted weeks. Shares of Nvidia slipped after Bloomberg broke the news. A Bloomberg survey shows economists are paring their expectations on how far the European Central Bank will cut rates. They anticipate 6 quarter-point reductions this year, 1 step less than they had predicted before the Governing Council last set policy in April. The news comes as Federal Reserve policymakers, including the Bank of New York, the Fed New York President John Williams, warned borrowing costs may need to stay higher for longer.
The behavior of the economy over the past year provides ample evidence that monetary policy is restrictive in a way that helps achieve our goals. We're seeing clear and consistent signs that the imbalances between supply and demand in the economy are receding, and we've seen a broad-based decline in inflation.
New York Fed President John Williams made clear that he was unable to confirm when he might support a rate cut because the decision will depend upon incoming economic data. Data out earlier Thursday showed the US economy grew at a slower pace in the first quarter than had been initially reported. The Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky says Royal Mail needs investment to avoid going into a deadly spiral. The tycoon, who is aiming to buy the company, told Bloomberg in an exclusive interview it needs urgent help.
Royal Mail is facing a very severe competition from Amazon, from DPD, from every newly also in a smaller scale from InPost. The parcel business is evolving quickly, the competition is evolving, and Royal Mail needs to invest massively to catch up with the latest trends. Otherwise, it will again lose market share.
Kretinsky adds that if his offer is rejected, Royal Mail could struggle to stay afloat. His £3.6 billion takeover offer on the eve of the UK general election looks set to provoke a struggle over the ownership of Britain's postal service. South Africa's ruling ANC party is set to lose its three-decade grip on power as votes continue to be counted. With half of the ballots counted, the African National Congress are predicted to win just 42% of the vote. That would force the ruling party into a coalition, which Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabasajja says is unprecedented.
People are quite surprised, and I think also a bit unnerved because there is a lot of uncertainty about what this could potentially look like, and especially if we think about what the past few months of campaigning have been. We have heard, in particular from the ANC, saying that they would not want to work with a party like the MK. But if these results continue to track and they are going to have to partner up with one of their main rivals, what does that look like in terms of governing? What does that look like in terms of policies that are implemented and also potential ministers?
Jennifer Zabasajja adds that coalition talks are unlikely to get away until final results come in during the weekend. Let's bring you more on our top story now. And that first in US political history, a former president found guilty on criminal charges. The New York jury found Donald Trump had committed 34 counts of falsifying business records, a verdict that could reshape the landscape for November's presidential election. Our Washington editor John Harney joins us for more. John, great to have you with us this morning. Remind us, what exactly was Trump found guilty of?
Well, the falsified business records that you just mentioned were, according to the charges, intended to conceal payment to an adult film performer, Stormy Daniels, who says that she had a sexual relations with Trump back in 2006. He denies this account, but according to the prosecutors, these payments were intended to silence her before the election, to protect him from being embarrassed in the weeks before the November 2016 election.
So what happens next in the legal process, John?
Well, next is the sentencing, which will be on July 11th, and only then can his lawyers file an appeal, as they almost certainly will. That appeals process could drag out for a very long time, well past the November election. It would wind its way through state courts in New York State and then into the federal system and perhaps all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Now, the sentencing could involve prison time, or it could involve probation, or some sort of recognizance until the appeals process plays out.
What does all of this mean for Donald Trump's election campaign?
Well, that's something we are really in new territory here. Some voters have said that some voters who would otherwise be disposed to vote for Trump said they'd be less likely to do so were he convicted. Others have said that they would stick with him no matter what. But this was all until today, or until Thursday, that was all hypothetical. This verdict hadn't been delivered yet, and so resoundingly with 34 guilty counts.
What have we heard from the Biden administration, Joe Biden's re-election campaign, about how they're viewing this verdict?
Well, they thus far, not very much. Just a statement saying that no one is above the law and verdict must be respected. It has not really played into campaign advertising and that sort of thing, but it likely will. It's an issue that, sure, the Biden campaign does not want to be forgotten by voters.
John, today's Bloomberg Big Take report is looking at the Wall Street billionaires that are supporting Donald Trump in this campaign. Will they stick with him now after this verdict?
Some will, no doubt. But, again, they were saying that verdict be damned, or as one of them put it, again, before the verdict was delivered. On the other hand, they have confidence in Trump's policies regarding regulation and perhaps taxation, and those haven't really been made completely clear at this point. But others, who are still on the sidelines might stay there. We really don't know. But I will say that, both candidates, Trump and Joe Biden, there's no unknowns here. This is an election where you're not voting for somebody who's not that clear to you, you don't have a strong impression of.
John, just give us a sense of the significance of this moment in this campaign. As you've been laying out for us, it's been set up to be a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which, as you've said, is to some sense a known scenario, given that it would be a repeat of the last election campaign. Is this going to be a moment, does this look like a moment that will change significantly how this campaign rolls out?
Many political observers, pundits say it will not, because, again, people have pretty much not necessarily made up their minds about how they're going to vote, but know very well who Donald Trump is, who Joe Biden is. And as you said earlier, Trump has survived 2 impeachments, the January 6th insurrection and the aftermath of that, indictments on these other cases, which are unlikely to come to trial. However, it's also a remarkable, unprecedented moment in American history. Something like this has never happened before with Richard Nixon, who faced potential charges back in the days of the Watergate scandal 40 years ago. He resigned before impeachment could take place, and then he was pardoned by Gerald Ford, of course. So the outcome, that never had an outcome in court like this.
Okay, well, making this a very even more interesting presidential election campaign. John Harney in Washington, thank you for joining us. Let's go to South Africa now, where voting continues after the elections. Projections show the African National Congress appears to have lost its majority for the first time since the end of apartheid. Our Africa correspondent Jennifer Zabasaja joins us now for more. Jennifer, good morning. What is the latest we have in results, and where is this looking to leave the ANC?
Yeah, good morning to you, Stephen. I'm actually at the Election Results Center here in Midrand. The latest from what we are seeing, and there was just about 51% of the vote that had been counted. And it is looking like for the first time in 30 years, the ruling party, the ANC, is not going to be in the majority. And this is significant for a few reasons. First of all, it's the fact that the ANC could potentially lose support by a wider margin than many polls were suggesting going into this election. And also, it's telling to see who is really, tracking just behind them. So we have the Democratic Alliance, the main opposition party, doing quite well, with about 20% support. But then also former President Jacob Zuma's newly formed party, just 6 months old, tracking in third place behind the African National Congress. And so we should note that, the ANC could potentially garner some more votes in Gauteng, which is the province that I am in, one of the most populous provinces, but clearly looking like many of the rural voters are, a bit frustrated with what they've seen with the ANC over the past few years and voted that way.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.